Good Lord, please don't die here. I don't even have enough money to call an ambulance. Lena screamed into the biting rain, her trembling hands clinging to the man slumped beside the road. His face was ashen, his breath fading, and through bleary eyes he managed to whisper, "My son." She was merely an exhausted waitress with less than $90 in her wallet and a gravely ill brother waiting at home for medicine. Yet in that moment, she chose to save a stranger rather than turn her back like so many others. And she had no idea that the man she was fighting to keep alive was a single billionaire himself, teetering on the edge just as she was. One act of rescue, one clasped hand, and from there destiny began anew. All right, my dear viewers, get ready for a story that will leave you speechless. Take a second to like the video, subscribe, and drop a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see viewers joining us from all around the world. Charleston in winter has its own brand of loneliness. When night falls, the old brick streets gleam in the cold rain like misted mirrors, reflecting the dim street lights in the soft echo of solitary footsteps. Lena Myers stepped out of the worn diner at the end of Broad Street, where she had worked for 3 years. The wall clock above the espresso machine had just struck 1:00 a.m. In her thin coat pocket were a few coins from tips and the unpaid half-month's prescription bill for her seriously ill brother. She was accustomed to the lingering scent of grease in her hair, the ache in her feet after 9 hours on her feet, and the unasked question, "Are you okay?" after every shift. But tonight, as she walked into the storm, everything felt quieter than usual, as if something was about to happen. The rain began in heavy sheets, stinging her chilled face. She hurried across the street, pressing an old scarf over her head. Then she froze. On the far curb, under a muted yellow street lamp, a man had collapsed to the pavement. He fell as if every ounce of life had been drained from him. No cry, no struggle, just a sharp thud that pierced Lena's thoughts like a knife through a balloon. She spun around, a moment's hesitation, a glance at the empty street. No one stopped. Cars still flowed by. Passers-by pressed on. Then, without another second's thought, Lena ran to him. The man was trembling, his left hand clutching his chest, his eyes wide in panic as though trying to cling to something slipping away. His face had turned ashen, his lips shades of purple. Lena knelt, her own hands shaking as she touched his icy skin. No calculation, no thought, only instinct. She dialed a taxi. An ambulance would take too long, and she had neither time nor money. When the taxi arrived, its tires flung water onto the curb. She helped him into the back seat, thrust every tip she had saved into the driver's hand, unsure if it was enough, and shouted, "Please, take us to the nearest hospital as fast as you can." Inside the cab, Lena held him upright and murmured nonsense to keep him conscious. Her drenched hair plastered to her cheeks. Her cold hands still gripped his as if holding life itself in her grasp. Then a weak voice slipped from his lips, an almost final breath carried away by the wind. "My son, please tell him I'm sorry." Her heart clenched. That plea echoed her mother's final moments, rushing to the ER, leaving behind an unfinished apology, and passing away before Lena could return. Lena looked at the stranger's face. She did not know his name, his life story, his wealth. Yet in his fading eyes she recognized something all too familiar, the terror of too late regret, and the fear of losing what matters most. When the taxi screeched to a halt at the ER entrance, a nurse sprang out to take him inside. Lena stood there soaked and frozen to the bone, but her heart pounded with an unfamiliar strength. She offered no name, left no note. She only watched the doors close behind him. No one knew who she was, but she knew who she had chosen to be. A human being who, that night, refused to turn away. And sometimes the smallest choice becomes the beginning of the unimaginable.
Welcome to 30 Millionaire Stories, where success meets solitude, and every story heals a hidden wound. Subscribe and discover the heart behind the fortune.
His name is Harrison Lowell, a name that once graced the cover of Forbes under the headline, "The Man Who Turned Crisis into a Real Estate Empire." To the world, Harrison was the ideal, self-made, sharp, decisive, a visionary who built a property conglomerate from a rented Brooklyn flat into a chain of resorts spanning America's East Coast. But behind those glossy covers lay a silent house in suburban Asheville, where each morning Harrison awoke to the echo of his own footsteps down empty halls. There he no longer heard anyone call him husband. Elena, his wife, had been the only person who made Harrison believe life wasn't a battle to be won, but a world to be lived. They met in their senior year of college. She studied literature, he studied finance. And for nearly 10 years, she was the soothing breeze that calmed his inner storm. 3 years ago, however, a ruthless disease struck, terminal ovarian cancer. Harrison threw everything he had at it, money, connections, midnight flights to experimental treatments in Switzerland, but nothing could stop time. On a crisp autumn afternoon, in his arms, Elena took her last breath, leaving behind their 3-year-old son, Caleb, who did not yet understand the word loss, and a man who thought he was prepared, but who had no idea how to live on. Since that day, Harrison's light slowly faded. Work became his only refuge. He subsisted on meetings, contracts, and cold numbers. His home was little more than a place to sleep, and his son Caleb fell silent as though bearing a loss too vast for words. Caleb did not cry. He did not whine. He did not rage. He simply sat for hours in a corner, sketching houses with no people, clutching the faded teddy bear his mother had left behind, his gaze fixed on some distant point. Harrison once boasted that his son was well-behaved, until his preschool teacher suggested a psychological evaluation for trauma. The truth was this: father and son both lived cocooned in isolation, two silent ghosts under one roof far too large for an unspoken grief. Then came that night. The rain fell in sheets as Harrison, returning late from a meeting, was felled by his first heart attack. His heart, weakened by stress and sleeplessness, rebelled. As he slipped into unconsciousness on the cold pavement, Harrison thought of no unfinished deal, no corporate message. He thought only of Caleb and of the words he could never voice. "You needed a mother's love, and I failed you." When he awoke, the hospital's fluorescent glare made everything feel unreal. A nurse told him he'd been rushed in just in time. A young woman had called a taxi, placed him in it, and then vanished. No name, no phone number, only one detail the nurse remembered: the faint scent of vanilla on the coat she wore. And Harrison remembered more than that. Her rough, trembling hand had gripped his as though his life still mattered. Her breath had come in ragged bursts amid the taxi's engine noise, the smell of rain, and the terror in her eyes. She was neither doctor nor acquaintance. Yet at the moment he was slipping away, she was the one who held him back. After a lifetime of thousands of polite handshakes, no one had ever touched Harrison Lowell like that. Not for gain, not for fame, but simply because he was a human being worth saving. He did not know her name, but he had to find it. For the first time in years, something unexpected had found its way into his world, something that had long been absent in that empty house: hope. Nearly 2 weeks after that rainy night, Harrison Lowell finally had the strength to leave his hospital bed, but his mind never rested. One image replayed endlessly: the woman's eyes bending down, gripping his hand, refusing to let go. No records, no name, nothing left behind but the faint scent of vanilla. Yet Harrison was a man who built an empire from nothing, and he didn't believe in can't. Within 48 hours, he had his team comb every security camera around the diner where he collapsed. From the murky taxi license plate the nurse recalled, they traced the cab company, the driver, and at last the address of the woman who had called the taxi, lifted him into its rain-soaked seat, and then vanished at the brink of life and death: Lena Myers. He arrived at the diner on a gray afternoon, wearing a slate gray trench coat and carrying a single manila envelope. The scent of frying oil, the clatter of pots, and the hiss of the espresso machine filled the air. Then he saw her. There was no doubt. Those eyes, steady, patient, yet harboring a world of quiet sorrow, could belong to no one else. She approached, surprised but calm. Harrison said nothing more than necessary. He placed the envelope on the counter. Inside was a check for $500,000. Lena stared down at it, frozen for a moment. Then she looked up, her gaze piercing through his tailored shirt and his measured reputation. She spoke a single line, gentle yet chilling the air. "You really think you can buy kindness?" Harrison froze. He had dealt with every kind of person, politicians, partners, the press, even exploiters. All had a price and all expected repayment. But this was the first time he faced someone who wanted nothing from him. No money, no handshake of gratitude, no promise of fame, just genuine goodness. Lena walked away. Harrison remained, clutching the check no one would cash. For the first time in years, he felt powerless to control something. He couldn't purchase what could only be given: sincerity. 3 days later, he returned, this time without a suit, without a luxury car, without a check. He was simply a father, his face lined with the exhaustion of a man who had tried too long to face his battles alone. Lena was wiping tables when he approached. She recognized him but said nothing, only watched, waiting. Harrison drew a slow breath. Then, in the low, rough voice of a man who once had everything but now clung only to what mattered most, he said, "My son doesn't speak to anyone, not his therapist, not his teacher, not even me. But I think he will speak to you." He looked up at Lena, his gaze no longer that of a sharp-edged entrepreneur, but of a solitary father. "I'm not here to buy kindness. I'm just asking one thing. Please stay with my pet. Be his friend. Let him know someone sees him." Lena stood silent for a long moment. Outside the window, a light rain began to fall. In that space, his request felt fragile, tender, and utterly sincere. And for the first time, she did not refuse. She didn't need the money. But perhaps someone needed her presence more than she ever knew. A father's whisper for help, a child waiting to be understood, and a wounded heart that might just bridge them both. My dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a drink, then stay tuned for the next surprising chapter. Comment number 1 if you're still here and enjoying the story. Lena had refused, not because she was afraid, but because she felt inadequate. She was just a solitary woman who'd never learned how to befriend a child with wounds so deep. But something in Harrison's eyes, a plea spoken not with words but in silence, made her unwilling to turn away a second time. A few days later, she agreed to meet Caleb. Harrison's house was vast and silent, like a tilted old painting. Everything was neat and in order, yet devoid of warmth. Lena was led into the living room, and then the boy appeared, slowly, hesitantly, peeking from behind the doorframe, clutching a well-worn teddy bear. He said nothing, only watched her. Caleb's gaze was neither fierce nor fearful, only sad, as though his childhood had been stolen before it even began. Lena did not force conversation. She sank onto the rug, opened her bag, and took out a handful of cookies she'd baked that morning. She bit one quietly, said nothing, then placed the rest on a plate nearby. Caleb stared, remained still. After a few silent minutes, he approached, sat down, bear held tight, and gently touched a cookie. No miracle, no burst of joy, but it was a beginning. From that day on, Lena came every afternoon after her shift. No schedule, no fee, driven only by something in her that softened each time she sat beside that child. They spoke sparingly. She brought storybooks, fairy tales she had loved as a child, foxes searching for sunlight, wooden boats weathering storms to find a warm harbor. She didn't know if he listened, but Caleb always stayed. And whenever rain began to fall, he pulled a chair beside the window so she could sit next to him. Once, Lena asked softly, "Why do you like the rain so much?" Caleb did not answer, But that afternoon, he placed his teddy bear on her lap, a silent thank you. Gradually, an odd rhythm formed between them. Baking sessions in the kitchen where Lena let him knead dough and then smear flour on her face as though she were a monster, painting afternoons on the balcony. Caleb drew houses without doors. Lena quietly added the missing windows. And sometimes when Caleb dozed on the sofa, Lena simply sat and watched him, as if witnessing the childhood she herself had never been allowed to fully live. Then one quiet afternoon, just after the rain eased, Lena was gathering books when Caleb crept over. He gently tugged her hand and whispered like a breeze stirring leaves, "Miss Lena, you're like my mom." Lena froze. She looked down to see Caleb gazing up, his eyes no longer heavy with sorrow, but carrying something gentler, warmer, though still fragile. At the end of the hallway, Harrison stood silently. He had heard. No one saw him turn away, hand raised to his face. But tears slipped free, like water finally breaking through a dam. From that day on, nothing more needed to be said, but everything had changed. Harrison began inviting Lena to stay for dinner. At first, the excuse was simple. Caleb eats better when you're here. But soon the meals grew longer, laughter echoed more freely, and their conversations expanded beyond Caleb's schedule to include the pieces of life he'd nearly forgotten, the book he'd left unfinished, the dish Elena once cooked, the jazz tune Lena favored on rainy days. Harrison laughed more often, not the courteous smile of a businessman, but the relieved grin of a man slowly healing. Something inside him was rekindling, something he had thought lost with Elena. And Lena, though she never said it outright, felt herself beginning to belong somewhere. But could a heart that had once been broken dare to believe it deserved the new warmth blossoming within it? April in Sonoma returns with gentle sunlight and spring breezes as light as a whisper. Caleb's preschool had organized his first field trip since months of emotional therapy. Harrison, never one for community events, agreed to come only because Caleb grabbed his hand tightly and said one word, "Mom, go." Lena was there too. She was no longer an outsider, no longer the kindly babysitter. Something nameless yet unmistakable had formed between her, Caleb, and Harrison. Something unspoken, unbound, yet so real that each felt peace simply by being together. The camp lay 2 hours from the city. Children ran across the grass as if released from an invisible cage. Lena sat on a wooden bench, eyes fixed on Caleb kicking a ball. Harrison stood a few paces away, smiling softly, hands in his pockets. He was about to call Lena over for lunch when everything went dark before his eyes. The pain struck like a blade to his left chest. He collapsed, one hand clutching his heart, the other grasping for support, as though a few more seconds upright might save him. But his body refused. He sank onto the lawn amidst panicked cries. Lena reached him first. She shoved children aside, dropped to her knees beside him. Her trembling hand pressed to Harrison's icy cheek. His complexion was ashen and his mouth parted as though to speak, but his breath faltered. She dialed 911, her voice cracking into the wind. The phone seemed to slip from her grasp. She leaned his head against her, pressing her cheek to his chest, eyes shut, as if hoping her heartbeat could revive him. "You can't leave my boy. You can't leave me." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. In that moment, Lena realized she had confessed everything, her fear, her attachment, and a love that had quietly grown for who knows how long. The ambulance arrived. Lena did not release his hand during the ride to the hospital. She followed the stretcher into the operating room, standing outside for nearly 3 hours, eyes wide yet hollow, her tears dried, her chest consumed by suffocating dread. When the surgery ended and the doors swung open, Lena found the strength to run in. Harrison stirred, his gaze still blurred by anesthesia, but the first sight he sought was hers. They said nothing. Lena took his hand and pressed it to her cheek. In that silence, they both knew. If the first rescue was fate, this one was choice. A week later, Harrison recovered. He asked Lena and Caleb to join him in one place, the lavender hills where he and Elena had taken their wedding photos, their symbol of lost happiness. When they arrived, the hills lay awash in purple under the setting sun. The breeze drifted among the blossoms, carrying their sweet, nostalgic scent. Harrison wore no suit, only a simple sweater. Caleb scampered among the flowers. Lena stood quietly, her fingers brushing the lavender stalks. When she looked back, Harrison was kneeling. No perfect script, no grand stage, just a small silver ring cradled in his trembling palm. I can't promise to be perfect. His voice was rough but steady. I can't change the losses we've known. But I do know this family isn't whole without you. No applause, no tears streaming down her face, only Caleb, silently stepping forward to hug Lena's legs and look up at her, waiting. And for the first time, Lena nodded without hesitation. Because sometimes a proposal need not happen beneath a tree. It only needs to be spoken when two hearts are truly ready. 1 year later, snow began to blanket the eaves of the little house nestled at the edge of the pine woods outside Asheville. The home wasn't large or luxurious, but every window and corner glowed with a light more gentle than any chandelier or scented candle. The light of lives being renewed and family bonds growing stronger each day. Inside the cozy kitchen, steam blurred the window panes, and the scent of waffles and roast chicken mingled in the air, evoking an inexpressible warmth. Lena stood at the stove, stirring a pot of creamy corn soup, her hair casually tied back, but loose strands brushing her cheeks. She wore no fancy dress, only a soft, well-worn sweater and an apron printed with a Christmas tree, a gift Caleb had picked out at the school fair. Footsteps pattered across the floor. The living room door cracked open, and Caleb burst in, cheeks rosy from playing in the snow. He clutched his old teddy bear, now sporting a small knitted scarf Lena had made last autumn. He raced to her, tugged at her sleeve, his eyes sparkling like melting snow on the sill. Mom, Lena. He hesitated, then produced a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. I wrote a letter to Santa, but I guess I don't need to send it anymore. Lena wiped her hands on her apron and gently unfolded the note, reading his childlike scrawl. I want a mother to read me stories every night, and someone who won't ever leave. Below, in smaller letters, but I think Santa already gave me that. Lena bent down and enveloped Caleb in a hug. He buried his face in her shoulder, breathing warm and safe. She said nothing, simply held him, as though embracing every broken piece of him and every broken piece of herself. The front door opened. Harrison stepped inside, brushing snow off his coat and carrying a bundle of small fir branches, not for decoration, but for he and Caleb to hang the wooden stars they had handcrafted together. He paused at the sight before him, his wife and son in the kitchen, faces weary but joyful, and his heart tightened, not with sorrow, but with fullness. He walked over and wrapped both of them in his arms. A perfect embrace, not too wide to feel empty, not too tight to feel forced, but just right to declare, here at last was home. In the corner, a small tree bore simple ornaments, paper bows, pine cones, and a photo of the three of them on Lavender Hill that late summer evening. Beneath its boughs lay a few gifts wrapped in newsprint. Lena had carefully saved for new books for Caleb and a vintage watch for Harrison, replacing the one ruined in surgery. None of them wanted anything extravagant. They had once lived fearing there might be no tomorrow, and so every present now was the most precious gift of all. Outside the window, snow continued to fall, quiet and tender as a whisper from the past. Lena gazed out, recalling how a year ago she had walked that same street in rain, pockets nearly empty, her mind weighed down by her brother's illness and a life no one had awaited. She didn't know what made her stop beside that roadside that night. Perhaps instinct, perhaps fate, or perhaps her heart, though weary, had never stopped hoping. Now in this warm little house, as Caleb's footsteps faded up the stairs and Harrison held her close by the stove, Lena understood, second chances don't always arrive with fireworks. They arrive quietly, through a hand held out, a gaze meeting yours, a promise whispered at just the right moment. We will never leave each other again. And so another Christmas began, not perfect, but for the first time in their lives, complete. Sometimes life's greatest changes don't come from miracles, but from a small choice, like stopping in the rain to help a stranger. Lena and Harrison's story reminds us, true kindness doesn't require wealth, and love often doesn't begin with grand vows, but in simple, heartfelt moments when a heart dares to open once more, despite past fractures. If you've faced loss or pain or ever felt forgotten by the world, believe that opportunities remain, people still care, and every stormy night can lead you to unexpected beauty. Tell us, what did you take away from their story? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss our next healing tale. And if you believe someone needs to hear this today, share this video with them because you might just be their miracle.